Have you ever looked at a pile of trash and seen $5 million? Most people see a broken couch sitting on the curb and think, someone forgot to call the garbage truck. A rusty grill, junk, an old dining table, worthless, a garage packed floor to ceiling with dusty boxes, a headache waiting to happen. But for a small group of people across America, those exact same things represent something completely different opportunity every single day. Millions of dollars worth of perfectly usable furniture, appliances, antiques, collectibles, and construction materials are thrown away by homeowners who simply want them gone as fast as possible. They don't want to negotiate. They don't want to list items online. They don't want strangers coming to their house. They just want everything to disappear. And that's exactly where one of the least glamorous businesses in America quietly creates millionaires. Not software, not crypto, not real estate, trash. Today, we're following the journey of a man we'll call Ethan, not because his story is unique, but because thousands of entrepreneurs across the United States have built surprisingly similar businesses using the exact same principles. When Ethan was 28, he wasn't looking for a dream career. He was looking for rent money. He had tried retail jobs, warehouse work, food delivery, and even construction. Nothing seemed to move his life forward. Every month felt the same. Work, pay bills, start over. One afternoon, while helping a friend clean out his grandmother's house before it was sold, Ethan noticed something strange. The family wasn't asking what anything was worth. They weren't checking online prices. They weren't calling antique dealers. They kept saying the same sentence. "Can somebody just take all this away?" That sentence changed everything. Inside the house were old wooden cabinets, vintage lamps, solid oak furniture, exercise equipment, bicycles, kitchen appliances, and dozens of unopened storage boxes. To the family, it was clutter. To Ethan, it looked expensive. He borrowed a pickup truck and loaded as much as he could fit. His friends laughed. "You're literally taking home someone else's garbage." Maybe they were right. The couch smelled old. The dining table had scratches. Half the boxes looked like they hadn't been opened in 20 years. But instead of throwing everything away, Ethan spent the weekend researching every item online. What happened next completely changed his understanding of money. The scratched dining table sold for $400. An old brass lamp sold for $180. A dusty toolbox brought in nearly $300. Even the worthless exercise bike sold within 2 days. After paying for gas and dump fees, he still made more than $1,200 for one weekend of work. That was more money than he usually earned after an entire week at his regular job. Most people would celebrate the extra cash and move on. Ethan became obsessed. He started asking a different question. What if America isn't throwing away trash? What if it's throwing away businesses? Over the next month, he noticed something almost nobody else paid attention to. Every neighborhood had piles of furniture sitting outside before garbage collection. Apartment complexes threw away mattresses every single week. Contractors filled dumpsters with leftover building materials that were still usable. Families moving across the country abandoned perfectly functional household items because replacing them was easier than transporting them. The more he looked, the more valuable junk seemed to become. But collecting random items from sidewalks wasn't a real business. It wasn't predictable. It wasn't scalable. If he wanted consistent income, he needed people to actually pay him to remove their unwanted items. That's when he discovered an industry hiding in plain sight: junk removal. Companies were charging hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars simply to clear garages, basements, storage units, offices, and entire homes. Customers paid because convenience had become more valuable than the items themselves. Time was the real product, not trash removal. And once Ethan understood that, everything changed. He didn't have money for fancy trucks. He didn't have investors. He didn't even have a warehouse. He had an old pickup, a borrowed trailer, a cheap website, and a phone that he answered every single time it rang. His first paid job came from a neighborhood Facebook group. A retired couple needed decades of accumulated junk removed before downsizing. The estimate was $450. Ethan secretly hoped the house wouldn't be completely empty. When he opened the garage door, he realized he had just walked into something far bigger than a cleanup job. The garage looked less like a storage space and more like a forgotten time capsule. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with tools, camping gear, fishing equipment, paint cans, holiday decorations, and dozens of sealed cardboard boxes covered in years of dust. Most people would have seen chaos. Ethan saw inventory. Still, he reminded himself why he was there. The couple wasn't paying him to shop. They were paying him to make the problem disappear. So he worked fast. Old furniture went into the trailer. Broken appliances were separated for recycling. Metal scraps were stacked together because scrapyards actually paid for certain materials. Anything clearly damaged beyond repair went straight to the dump. But every time he picked up an item that looked valuable, he set it aside for a second look. By sunset, the garage was empty. The homeowners couldn't stop smiling. They thanked him, handed him the agreed payment, and even tipped him another $50 for finishing ahead of schedule. For them, the transaction was over. For Ethan, it was only beginning. That night, instead of going home to relax, he spread everything across his driveway. One by one, he researched every item. A professional grade power saw sold for $350. A vintage fishing reel attracted collectors from 3 different states. A set of unopened hand tools sold within hours. An old Coca-Cola sign that had been hanging unnoticed in the garage for decades sold to a collector for nearly $900. When he added everything together, something unbelievable happened. The homeowners had paid him $500 to remove the items. The scrap yard paid him another few $100s. And the pieces they thought were worthless generated several $1,000s more. For the first time, Ethan understood the hidden economics of clutter. He wasn't getting paid once. He was getting paid multiple times from the same job. Removal fee, recycling, reselling. Sometimes, even donations created tax advantages or reduced disposal costs. Every truckload had multiple income streams hidden inside it. That realization completely changed how he ran the business. He stopped thinking like someone hauling junk. He started thinking like an asset hunter. Soon, his daily routine became almost scientific. Every morning began by answering customer calls. Every afternoon was spent removing unwanted items. Every evening was dedicated to sorting, cleaning, photographing, pricing, and listing valuable finds online. It wasn't glamorous. His hands were constantly dirty. His clothes smelled like old garages. He spent weekends at recycling centers instead of beaches. Friends wondered why he worked so much. They couldn't understand why someone with a college education was digging through other people's unwanted belongings. What they didn't see was his bank account. Month after month, the numbers kept climbing. Then something unexpected happened. His best customers weren't homeowners anymore. They were real estate agents. Whenever a house needed to be sold quickly after an owner passed away, whenever landlords had tenants leave everything behind, whenever investors bought abandoned properties, one phone call solved the problem. Ethan showed up. Within hours, the property was empty and ready for the next step. To real estate professionals, speed was worth far more than saving an old couch or a stack of boxes. That made his business incredibly valuable. Soon, referrals started replacing advertisements. One satisfied customer became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became hundreds. Instead of chasing work, work started chasing him. But success created a different problem. His old pickup truck was no longer enough. Some days he had to turn down jobs simply because he couldn't move everything fast enough. Every declined job meant leaving thousands of dollars on the table. Most people, when faced with that situation, would try to work longer hours. Ethan chose something smarter. He invested almost every dollar he had saved into a larger truck. It felt terrifying. The monthly payment was higher than his apartment rent. If business slowed down, he could lose everything. But within weeks, that truck completely changed the economics of his company. Now he could finish jobs in half the time. He could accept larger contracts. He could serve commercial clients. And most importantly, one trip now carried what previously required 3. Revenue increased dramatically, while fuel, labor, and time stayed surprisingly efficient. That single investment paid for itself far faster than he ever expected. Tuesday morning, when his phone rang with a job that almost sounded too good to be true. An abandoned storage unit was scheduled for clean-out. The facility manager didn't care what was inside. Ethan agreed without asking too many questions. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, surrounded by rows of identical metal doors. From the outside, there was nothing special about Unit 214. No signs, no clues, just another lock that had been cut off after months of unpaid rent. The manager slid the door open and said, "Just have it empty by tonight." Ethan stepped inside with a flashlight. At first glance, it looked disappointing. Old furniture, plastic bins, dusty boxes, a broken office chair. Exactly the kind of unit most people would rush to dump without a second thought. But experience had taught him one important lesson. The first 5 minutes are almost always misleading. He began sorting everything into categories: trash, donate, recycle, sell. As he opened each box, the story slowly changed. One contained dozens of unopened power tools still in their original packaging. Another was filled with collectible vinyl records from the 1970s behind an old dresser. He discovered several industrial cameras that had once been used by a small production company. None of those items looked extraordinary by themselves. Together, they were worth several $1,000s. And then he noticed something even more valuable: patterns people from the outside believed. Junk removal was about moving heavy objects. It wasn't. It was about recognizing value that everyone else ignored. The more jobs he completed, the better his eye became. Within seconds, he could tell the difference between a cheap piece of furniture and one made from solid hardwood. He learned which brands mechanics searched for, which vintage toys collectors fought over, which restaurant equipment sold within hours, which electronics were worth repairing, and which items looked expensive but had almost no resale value. That knowledge became his biggest competitive advantage. Because anyone could rent a truck, very few people could identify hidden value in a room filled with clutter. Soon, Ethan wasn't just earning money from removing junk. He had built an entire system around it. High-quality furniture went to local buyers. Collectibles were sold online to national customers. Scrap metal went to recycling yards. Construction materials were purchased by contractors. Working appliances were cleaned and resold. Anything that couldn't be sold was donated, reducing disposal costs while helping local charities. Almost nothing went to waste. Ironically, the less he threw away, the more money he made. As revenue continued growing, another opportunity appeared. Customers kept asking the same question: "Can you also clean the property after everything is gone?" At first, Ethan always said no. Cleaning wasn't his business. But then he realized something. Every additional service solved another problem for the customer. And businesses that solve more problems usually earn more money. So he hired a small cleaning crew. A few months later, he added light demolition services, old sheds, kitchen tear-outs, damaged decks. Soon after that came estate cleanouts, office liquidations, foreclosure properties, and commercial warehouse clearances. Without realizing it, Ethan had quietly transformed a simple junk removal company into a full-service property solutions business. His average invoice kept getting larger. $500 became $1,000. $1,000 became $3,000. Some commercial projects exceeded $10,000. People still assumed he owned the trash company. What they didn't realize was that trash had become only one small piece of a much larger machine. By his 5th year in business, he finally hired a full-time office manager. For the first time, he wasn't answering every phone call himself. Then he hired drivers, then crews, then salespeople. Instead of working inside the business every day, he started working on the business. His role changed completely. He analyzed marketing, negotiated commercial contracts, built relationships with property managers, tracked numbers, improved systems. Because he had discovered another truth about wealth. If your business only works when you're physically there, you don't own a business. You own a job. Real freedom begins when systems replace constant effort. And that's exactly what Ethan spent years building. 1 truck became 3. 3 became 8. Crews operated across multiple cities at the same time. While one team emptied a foreclosure property, another cleared out a retail store, and another handled a same-day residential pickup across town. Customers never saw the operation behind the scenes. They only saw a truck arriving exactly when promised. But behind every successful job was a business that had become far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. And that's when the financial picture became almost unbelievable, because the money wasn't coming from one lucky find. It was coming from a machine that generated revenue every single day, whether valuable collectibles were found or not. Most people spend their entire lives searching for the perfect business idea. Yet some of the most successful entrepreneurs simply solved problems everyone else wanted to avoid. So the next time you see something people call junk, ask yourself one question. Is it really worthless, or have you just never learned how to recognize its value? If you enjoyed this story and want to discover more hidden business models that quietly create millionaires, subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the biggest fortunes are built in the places nobody else is willing to look.